Welcome to the Energetic Psyche, a weekly podcast hosted by yours truly, Dr. Adrienne Campbell. This week, for episode 37, I have Kelsey Esser, a licensed clinical social worker, to talk about RO-DBT, Radically Open Dialectical Behavior Therapy, and her work with eating disorders. I hope you enjoy this episode. All right, so welcome to the Energetic Psyche, a weekly podcast hosted by yours truly, Dr. Adrienne Campbell. This week, for episode 37, I have Kelsey Esser, a licensed clinical social worker, to talk about RO-DBT, Radically Open Dialectical Behavior Therapy, and her work with eating disorders. So I want to share just a little bit about Kelsey with you. Kelsey is a licensed clinical social worker and owner of the Current Therapy Services. She specializes in treating eating disorders and training and mentoring new therapists. Kelsey has been practicing therapy and treating eating disorders and adjacent issues for the past 10 years. She has dedicated the last several years of her career to understanding the connection between nervous system regulation and eating disorders by becoming a level 2 trained, radically open dialectical behavioral therapist. She helps both her clients and the new therapists at her practice develop skills to effectively regulate the nervous system so that they can enhance their connections, leading to quality relationships and greater psychological flexibility. Kelsey, I am so glad that you're here, and I am so excited to learn about RO-DBT.
It's a mouthful. Thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Absolutely. So why don't we get started with a little bit about you? Where do you come from?
Sure. Yeah. Well, just right down the road, I was born and raised in Blackwater, Missouri. It's a tiny little town just west of here. And I went to college at Mizzou for both my undergrad and graduate degrees. And so I've been around here in the community for quite some time.
Nice. I think there's always something special about like being able to work in your own community, right?
Yeah. Being able to give back to, the people that helped, form who you are today. It's pretty special.
Right. Yeah. Awesome. So what led you into your work? What made you decide to become an LCSW?
Yeah, well, it's that cliche thing. I always wanted to help people in some way, and I was just really drawn to therapy. I really love understanding people on a pretty deep level, understanding, why they think and act and behave in the ways that they do. And I'm just really, really drawn to just psychology and neuropsych, especially. But I got my start in child welfare, actually. I worked several years as a case manager in child welfare, and really just wanted to work more one-on-one with people for a longer term, which led me to therapy. So then I worked in higher levels of care for substance abuse and eating disorders, and eventually made my way into outpatient doing private practice therapy, and just noticed that there's you don't learn about eating disorders in school while you're working on your
Really?
psychology degrees. No, maybe a paragraph, in a class on a random Wednesday or something. But no, you don't get taught about eating disorders in school, and so there's a huge gap of knowledge out there about eating disorders and treating them safely and effectively. And so I really wanted to teach more therapists how to safely treat them. And so I created a whole practice to do that. Eating disorders have the second highest mortality rate of all mental illnesses, right behind opioid overdoses. And so it's a really serious matter, and they get overlooked so often, and people are really suffering. So
that's incredible. Yeah, I didn't know that at all. So my education in psychology was a little bit different because I didn't go through a clinical program. My master's and PhD are both non-clinical. So we don't learn about diagnoses and things like that, or at least I didn't. But it blows my mind that they wouldn't address that in more depth in school. But I mean, so honestly, I'm planning on going back to school in the spring to get another
Mhm.
master's.
Wow.
I know. I know. Well, because I didn't want to be a therapist. I wanted to be a coach. I was dead set. I was like, nope, I'm good as a coach. I'm good as a coach. And as it is, I refer out like half of my clients to therapists.
Mhm.
And I want to be able to work more deeply with people at this point. So,
I
but
feel
I
the
was
same.
going through the curriculum because I looked
Mhm.
at a lot of programs because I'm like, I already have a PhD. I don't want to,
It'd be super
anyway.
redundant, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Or anything that pulls away from my already foundational practice because I'm a Jungian, right? So it's a little
Mhm.
bit different.
Yes.
And but yeah, I was very surprised at how simple the curriculum was in many of the programs. So I
Yes.
guess I'm not that terribly surprised that it's not included.
It's very generalized, it's very foundational, and anything
Mhm.
you want to really specialize in, I mean, that comes after grad
Well,
school,
I guess
like
while you're getting your hours and in your
yeah.
supervision. Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting. So you're in LCSW, and I've had a few LPCs on the
Mhm.
podcast, and I have friends and family that do both, right?
Mhm.
But I remember when I was first looking into all this stuff, I was like, what in the heck is the difference?
Right.
Because I work with a Jungian analyst who's an LCSW.
Mhm.
And I was like, okay, wait, but like, are they social workers or are they therapists? And so, correct me if I'm wrong, but from what I have gathered, LCSW kind of allows you like this huge breadth of space to work in. Like you can work as a social worker,
Mhm.
right? My sister's girlfriend just finished her master's and is going into work with prison populations and things like that, right? And
Mhm.
then there's like children's homes. I think I had another LCSW who worked with that type of thing.
Yes.
But you can also like just do therapy, which I think is so cool. Whereas an LPC can't hit that whole breadth. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think more so now it is because there's a ton of overlap, but I remember going through the same process of which path do I go down, and
Mhm.
ultimately, I did choose social work because it did give you the ability to branch out so much more. I mean, we are trained in the way of working with, systems at all levels. And it seemed like, at the time that LPC was a little more individualistic and just working with, a person versus, and then social work has all kinds of social justice thrown in as well,
Right.
which I was drawn to too. So they are so similar though. I don't, and once you get out and get your license and, get some experience, I think you can really, you know, branch out in kind of whatever way you want to, regardless of your license type.
Yeah. Well, and then there's MFTs too, right?
Yes.
Which
That's the
is
thing.
a whole other thing.
This is the
But
thing.
yeah, no, I always like it's one thing that's really cool about this podcast is just having conversations with people who from like first glance are like, oh, it's all the same. But then the more deeply you go into conversation and talk about what they do, you know, it's I don't know. It's just such an interesting world in all the different places that we can work and help, I think.
Mhm. Mhm. I know. It is comforting to know if I ever, you know, burn out, lose a little passion for what it is I'm doing, that I do have so many different options to work in ways that still, make an impact on people's wellness. It doesn't have to
Right.
be, one to one.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah. And I think a lot of people who work in one-to-one situations are starting to figure that out. Like with my practice, I've always been pretty spread across the board in a lot of ways because
Mhm.
I know that people need a lot of different avenues and entrances to getting
Mhm.
help.
Yes.
And the more we can vary that, the more different types of offerings we can provide, I
Mhm.
think the easier it is for people to find the help they need.
There is no one way to heal at a
Even for a person, like at this point in your life, like this might be the thing. And then like
Right.
6 months down the road, maybe it's this over here.
Yes.
And, even with my classes, I always tell people like, yeah, I can be your teacher for this. I'm like,
Mhm.
but don't be afraid to learn the same thing from someone else.
Yeah. Yep. You
Just
never
like,
know when it's gonna click too.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
because
You
we have
know,
that phenomenon too, where you talk about something in therapy over and over, and then they watch a TikTok about it, and it like clicks in a different way.
and they're like, I just learned this thing from from
Like, no,
TikTok.
I
And you're
didn't say
like,
that. Yeah.
crazy,
Yeah.
crazy that.
Yes.
But hey, whatever works, right? Whatever
Whatever
gets
works.
them there.
Mhm.
Awesome. Okay. So did you go to school locally?
Yeah, so, I went to undergrad and graduate school at University of Missouri, both in the
Okay.
social work program. Mhm.
Awesome. Very
Yes.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay. And then I know you own your own practice now, right?
Mhm. Yes. We started, the current I say we, because when we initially formed, we were a team of DBT providers in the community. There were 3 of us, myself, Melanie Ramos Green, and Carmen Bias were providing a comprehensive DBT program in the community. And it just the structure of it wasn't working for us anymore, so we decided to house it under, um, someone's private practice, which ended up being the current.
Gotcha.
So that was back in 2021, and we were just a standard DBT program, and we've grown from there. And now we have a practice of 8 clinicians, and we've moved away from standard DBT a little bit, and we do a RO-DBT program. And we
Awesome.
have found this to be so much more effective in the work that we do, which is specialize in eating disorders. So we've totally shifted into having the foundation of RO at our practice.
Cool. And I'm pretty sure I know Carmen. Believe it or
Yeah,
not. Yeah.
totally. She knows a
It's
lot
a
of
small town. Yeah.
yeah.
So if you could explain to us just like what DBT is and then where the RO component comes in, because I'm pretty familiar with CBT. I think most people are. It's cognitive behavioral therapy. That's been the standard for a long time. But I know DBT has been on the rise for the last decade, and I see it and I hear it all the time. So what's the difference between CBT and DBT? And then let's add the RO in there.
Hey, yes, I really like how you structured this. So
Perfect.
first between CBT and DBT. So CBT, you're right, was pretty foundational and used across the board for so long. But what they were finding is that they were missing a set of the population that it was really effective for. And those were the folks that had really more complex issues and, you're really deep feelers, you're highly sensitive people. A lot of times they got labeled with borderline personality disorder. And these folks were really needing so much more validation and acceptance alongside tools and strategies for coping differently. And so that's what DBT did that was different from CBT was it added in that component of a lot of validation, a lot of acceptance, and then also a commitment to an entire program. So not only were you getting weekly individual therapy, you were getting a 2-hour skills class, and you were getting coaching with your therapist. So you were integrating skills into your daily life outside of the therapy room. And that
Perfect.
was so much more effective for people who just needed more.
Yeah.
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 So
That
that's,
makes sense. That's beautiful. Yeah.
yeah. So then once again, you kind of have the same story happening. So DBT, it's being used widely, it's effective.
Mhm.
And then you have this subset of the population where it just wasn't quite hitting, it wasn't quite working, it wasn't quite effective. And those were people that did not have like, really intense emotions kind of just outpouring, and they weren't, behaving impulsively and kind of sporadically. These were the people that were really stuffing down emotions. They had a hard time connecting with others. They were really actually very lonely, yet they were people that were being missed, I guess, by the mental health system because they were high functioning. I guess you could say they were doing really well in school. They were performing really well. They were,
Because as long as you hit those levels, you
yes,
fit the box, you're
yes,
fine.
you're
You're
fine,
fine.
you're
Yeah.
fine.
Mhm.
But these were folks that had hidden eating disorders, severe eating disorders. They were, like I said, very lonely, chronically suicidal. And DBT didn't quite seem to be effective for these people. They didn't need help regulating emotions. They needed help expressing emotions.
Right. Bringing
So
it out of the body.
yes.
Yeah.
So that is the key difference between standard DBT and RO-DBT is standard DBT is focused on regulating emotion
Okay.
and pulling in more logic to balance out your emotion. And RO-DBT is focused on being able to express emotion and introduce a lot of flexibility into some rigid kind of ways of behaving.
That is perfect. Beautiful description, Kelsey. Thank you.
You.
That is awesome. Absolutely. So, using this, well, let's talk a little bit more about eating disorders, right? You mentioned like a pretty heavy statistic a minute ago.
Mhm.
And really what pulled you into working in that space? Because it is, so I work with military and first responder trauma.
Yes.
And that's one of the ones where people are like, oh my God, because it's heavy, right? Just
Mhm.
like eating disorders, like any major like trauma it's heavy. It's a lot to step into and work in. So there usually has to be something drawing you there, and for me, I was in the Coast Guard. So these are my brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I'm just wondering, like, what pulled you into that? Was it some of the work that you did before you went into private practice, or was it just a fascination with a population that was kind of left behind?
Both, I think. Yes. So when I was working in substance abuse residential treatment, a lot of my clients had co-occurring eating disorders, yet
Yeah.
no one addressed them. No one knew how to treat them. No one knew anything about them, which made me feel really uncomfortable. I don't like feeling incompetent. I mean, we could deep dive into that, but like,
I think most people, most people don't really enjoy that experience.
you don't like not knowing what I'm doing. So
Right.
I have to learn more about this. I mean, I think the stat on the co-occurrence between eating disorders and substance abuse is like, I don't 60%. I need to look that up, but it's high.
Yeah. Have you ever heard of, I know you're not a Jungian, but have you heard of Marion Woodman?
Heard of,
So she
yes.
was a contemporary with Jung
Mhm.
and one of his colleagues slash students. She has a beautiful book. I want to say it's called The Sacred Feminine, but
Yes.
she talks
Yes.
the book?
I know the
Okay.
book.
Yes. So she goes all into addiction and eating disorders and the
Mhm.
connection between the two. Yeah, it's a gorgeous book.
Yes.
Gorgeous.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's been years since I've read it, but yes, I know the book. And I lost my train of thought. That's okay. That
The
happens.
connection between
Yes.
addiction and eating
Oh,
disorders. Yeah.
yeah. So, the more I started learning, the more I realized just really how complex they were.
Mhm.
And just from being trained as a DBT therapist, I love working on teams. I love consulting, and eating disorders are treated by a multidisciplinary team. They have to be because they're so much of it is a physical condition. So when you're working with these people, you're also working with their doctor and their dietitian, and I love collaborating in that way. So it just lends itself the work lends itself naturally to you're not alone, you're not
Mhm.
doing this by yourself. It you have to have a lot of humility and ability to be open and collaborate with so many people regarding one person. And so I love that teamwork. But yeah, it's so missed. There's not a lot of people that know how to spot one, how to screen for one, how to treat one. And it is possible for these people to fly under the radar for a very long time until all of a sudden it's too late. So it's both those things. Yeah.
Yeah. I found working with first responders, especially military, is better now because they're reducing the stigma at like a ridiculously huge rate, right?
Yeah.
But first responders still have a pretty big issue. And so there's so much shame associated with it,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
right? Because for them, it's weakness. So there's this huge amount of shame that it's easy to bury. And
Mm-hmm.
even when people see a glimmer, ignore it because it's not what they want to see, because it impacts their existence and the way that they move through the world, right? And I feel like there's a similar vein here with eating disorders. That shame is what really buries it down. And it's such a reflection of what's wrong in our culture. I bet people unconsciously don't want to see it. And so it's easily ignored.
It is. It is. Or, we are a country that's very into diet culture.
Mm-hmm.
And, a lot of the ways that eating disorders start are through, a diet or weight loss or something of that nature. And it gets complemented and it gets reinforced. And it's not seen as this is, harming this person's life. It's celebrated.
Right.
And so you have that aspect too of not only is it being missed sometimes it's being rewarded. And
right, the behaviors, not the disorder or
sure.
the fact that it's wrong, like not work, it's not serving them. But yes, absolutely. Well, I mean, again, just like first responders bearing their pain with alcohol. Right? It's like, yeah, let's go get a bunch of drinks, blah, 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 blah. And so, oh man, you handle that so well. I love how you just go from, trauma to trauma to trauma without even having to deal with it. Like, that's amazing. So yes, I hear you. Yeah.
Yes, absolutely. I think RO-DBT does such an excellent job of addressing the shame component of really removing that layer. It has so much, there's so much that we teach clients about their coping style and how they, eating disorders by and large are just coping behaviors, with trauma, or they're coping with, correlating anxiety, things like that. But RO-DBT does an amazing job of just teaching someone about their nervous system and how they're coping through, restriction or binging or purging. And I think once they can understand that, they're not doing it on purpose, so they're not, there's a reason that they're doing it that allows them to alleviate some of the shame, having that understanding and self-compassion for themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think sometimes just knowing why something's happening alleviates suffering, know? Yeah. So you mentioned the nervous system a couple of times. So how does the nervous system tie into RO-DBT?
Yes. Without getting, we probably could have conversations for days about it. So not trying to get too technical here, but, 80% of the vagus nerve pathways goes into your gut. And so it really makes sense that there's a high level of co-occurrence with anything anxiety related and your eating, right? So oftentimes when somebody is stressed, anxious, that has direct impacts on their ability to eat and their digestive system. And so understanding how those things are connected is really important to being able to help someone change that. So when you are, feeling hypervigilant, stressed, or anxious, there's lots of things that happen physiologically, right? Your jaw locks up or tenses up. You might start to feel nauseous or lose your appetite. All those things can connect to eating disorder behaviors. So it can make it actually physically harder to eat when stress and anxiety are really high.
Right.
And so in RO, we help people understand sort of the different levels of their system. And when they are in that anxious state, most people refer to it as fight or flight. And then understanding how they can drop down to that freeze or shut down state. People usually can do that through substances or through restriction. It really has a way of shutting the body down. And so they can't feel, emotions. And the goal of RO is to really help them access their safety system, right? Bring them up to where they can connect with other people and use that type of support versus shutting down through their eating disorder behaviors. And so we teach several different skills on how to activate your social safety system, largely through how you connect to others.
Yeah.
And so, that's how RO sort of teaches about and helps you understand how to move through your nervous system with skills.
Yeah. So it's always interesting to me because it's it's a weird correlation, but it's kind of like religion. I've studied a lot of religion, and it all kind of says the same thing, but through different words in different books,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of therapeutic practices
Mm-hmm.
are doing the same things, but through
In
different
different
pathways and
languages.
different, yeah. And when I used to teach leadership, I would have a lot of the people because they were very constructive in their criticisms, would say, oh, yay, another flavor of the month. And I'm like, here's the deal. I'm like, we teach this and we do these things in so many different ways because everyone has a different pathway to finding the answer, kind of like we've already talked about, right? And so like what you're describing with Veterans Yoga Project and the work that we do regarding stress response in the central nervous system, we use the window of tolerance.
Yes.
Right. Yep. And we talk about like how to expand that window of tolerance and how to stay in the body. And social supports are a huge part of that. Interpersonal relationships and creating, that safe space through the help of others as well as yourself. But yeah, it's just always interesting to me to see the different viewpoints on the same thing. So that's really cool. So can I also ask, so I'm just like, I have so many questions because this is so not my specialty area. So I'm taking advantage of you, Kelsey.
Sure.
So eating disorders, I know, like the two big ones that I'm aware of is like anorexia and bulimia. I'm sure there are others though. So how else does it show up or present?
Yes. So yes, you have anorexia, which is, sort of the classically thought of eating disorder. It's when someone is restricting their intake and their body has changed as a result of that. And they usually have some sort of body image disturbance, as in they are not seeing themselves as other people may be seeing them. So there's anorexia and then bulimia. So that's the one with the compensatory purging behaviors. There's also binge eating disorder. So this is binging, but without any compensation afterwards, such as purging or excessive exercise or things like that.
Gotcha. Okay.
Then you also have ARFID. It's avoidant restrictive food intake disorder. This one, you can, it's not always within the neurodivergent spectrum of someone maybe having autism and having a lot of sensory, preferences around food. It can also be like the fear of choking or, just different strong preferences about, the textures, the smells, the preparedness, those type of fears kind of associated with food. Then you also have what we call other specified eating disorder. So
All the other stuff.
it is anything that doesn't fit nicely into one of those categories.
Right.
And that is actually the diagnosis that is the most common alongside binge eating disorder. Because what we're finding is these, people are not fitting into these nice, neat boxes.
Because people's are unique individuals. I know. It's crazy.
So the eating disorders tend to kind of morph over time, and you could have somebody who's going through a period of binge eating and then they would fall into, a period of restriction, and it just doesn't fit into these nice categories. And so also something that I think is surprising for people to understand is only about 6% of people with an eating disorder are actually underweight. So it's not like classic vision of somebody who is looking malnourished. It's anybody of any body type can be struggling with an eating disorder. And so again, they're not fitting into that criteria of anorexia, yet they are, restricting their food and doing, compensatory behaviors for when they do eat. And their weight's just not reflecting that. So again, they get missed a lot too.
Well, and like you were saying, those behaviors then become celebrated, right? Yeah. I had a really good friend when I was in the Coast Guard who suffered with anorexia, and we were best friends, lived on a ship. Okay. So I saw her every single day, like probably 12 to 14 hours a day. I was with this girl minimum. And I mean, we slept 4 feet from each other, right? For years, I had no idea. And then her drinking started getting out of control, and that damaged our friendship. And I, literally was like, I'm done. I can't go out, because I was literally carrying her home multiple port calls. And I was like, I mean, she's little, she's only 5'1" and I'm 5'10", but still, I don't want to be carrying my friend home every night. Yeah. And then within a couple months of us like not being friends really anymore, I started to notice weight dropping off her. And so I, pulled her aside and we had a serious conversation that I wouldn't let her escape from. And found out that she had been dealing with this for like 10 years.
Yeah.
And it's just wild that I could be so close to somebody. And I mean, I don't know how many meals we shared, et cetera, et cetera. And then looking back, I still didn't see very many signs, because I worked out too. We were in the military. We all worked out a lot.
Yeah.
You don't really think about it. And it really wasn't until I saw a weight difference that I noticed anything. It was kind of wild.
It is. It is. People that have eating disorders, they are the personality type that we refer to as over-controlled, which is what RO-DBT is for. And these are, your folks that are really good at not expressing their inner experiences, not expressing their emotions, their thoughts or feelings, minimizing quite a bit, and just really good actually at keeping things hidden and functioning until they can't. And, you see this with a lot of athletes too, that they do have an eating disorder, but they're functioning in their sport and they're still performing at a high level. And then as soon as that sport is done or the season is over or what have you, then you see it just becomes exasperated.
Yeah. Yeah. That's crazy. I'll tell you. Well, I'm glad that you're working in that area. So with RO-DBT, you mentioned that it's like a team effort, and there's programs that they go through and coaching, as well as just regular one-on-one therapy. So what would that look like for somebody?
Yeah. So typically people are coming to us for eating disorders or for trauma or for anxiety, and we're noticing, hey, you could use a little bit more support. And so then we introduce them to our comprehensive program, which they get weekly individual therapy, and they get a 1.5 hour skills class, and then they get the coaching, which is pretty instrumental in the success of this treatment, is that you can, talk to a therapist in real time and get, those integration of skills into your daily life. It's a 30-week program. So, and that's just because that's how many skills lessons there are. There are 30 skills, lots of skills within each skill. So you get, you walk away with a toolkit of about probably 200 skills.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah. And we are seeing we've had this program going for just over a year now, and we are seeing excellent results. We do program evaluation, and we're noticing lower levels of depression and anxiety after the program. People are reporting that they can more openly express their thoughts, their feelings. They have more capability in managing their eating disorder, largely due to being able to activate their social safety system, being able to connect more authentically with others, and then just in the flexible thinking, right? They're not so rule-based and rigid about, what they're eating, how they're eating, when they're eating, types of food they're eating. There's a lot more flexibility around that too. So
that's awesome. Yeah. Moving away from that black and white view of the world is so important in so many ways. And, in the last couple of years, I've changed the way I look at my diet pretty severely. And that, like, I'm more about just instead of restricting myself from certain things, it's just don't overdo it. And my sister, who is not there yet, and we're both from California, the state, which has a pretty big diet culture, we'll say. So we grew up very much in that space. I'll go to eat something and she's like, Adrienne, that's not healthy. Adrienne, that's not healthy. And I'm like, you don't get to say what's healthy for my body.
Right.
And she's like, well, and I'm like, you don't. Like, this is my body and I get to make those choices. And she's just like, oh. Like, it got to a point where I finally was like, look, I don't want to hurt your feelings. I know you love me and care about me, but like that's the way you see the world, and that's cool. And this is how I'm gonna see mine,
You're
you
so
know?
cool. Love that.
So yeah, like, but
Yeah.
it's, interesting. The first couple of times I did it, I was like, wow, like this is a new boundary for me that I've
Mhm.
never really had to set before. And it
Mhm.
made me reflect on how much my eating habits had changed.
Yeah.
Even though I wouldn't say that I had an eating disorder, there
Mhm.
definitely was some unhealthy patterning,
Mhm.
patterning in there.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
because, we absorb all that stuff from culture and the
Yeah.
way that we think, and,
Yeah.
it affects us in every
Yeah.
decision that we make.
Yeah. And, big difference between a diagnosable eating disorder and disordered eating. I would, argue that many people have disordered
Mhm.
eating just because of the diet culture,
Right.
but it is very freeing to have, people come into our space and be able to shift their mind into, there's no good and bad food.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
there's no
Right.
healthy versus not healthy. It all has a place. Food serves many purposes.
Yeah.
And that also translate into just the relationship with your body. My body is not good or bad. There's many purposes that it serves, and it's wonderful to watch somebody be able to be so flexible in their thinking around their food and body.
Yeah. And I think the culture that we're in these days, not everywhere, but compared to when I was growing up, is incredible when it comes to like radical acceptance,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And like I love the reels and stuff I see on Instagram where it's like, I'm getting my beach body ready, and she puts on a bikini and she's like, look, it's a body and it's ready for
Yeah.
the beach.
I love those.
I
Yeah.
know, and I'm like,
Yeah.
right? Like,
Yeah.
I remember when I was growing up, like there were girls in like April that would stop eating regular food and would
Mhm.
eat nothing but like a piece of toast every day for
Mhm.
months
Yeah.
because they wanted a perfect bikini body. And
Yeah.
like these were not friends of mine, but people I knew. And I remember when the girl first admitted it, told her, see, I say admitted it. She was like, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. Like it was totally normal. And I'm like, I'm sorry. What?
What?
Like, you're killing yourself, right? Like that's really damaging. But her and all her friends did it. And so
Mhm.
culturally it was a
Normalized.
norm.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's just what you did. So it's just wild how our culture impacts us. And I think that's so important when, yeah, there's Instagram and all that kind of stuff, but just the way that we talk about our bodies around our friends, our family,
Yes.
and if, yeah, I was just going to say, and then like, especially if your parents, well,
Mhm.
I'm not a parent, but I'm an auntie,
Mhm.
and so the way I talk about my body around the kids, that it all matters
Yeah.
because
So,
they absorb we all absorb it from each other.
yeah.
Yeah.
For so many reasons, we are, anxiety is high for most people now, and you don't have a shot at managing your anxiety and depression if you're not consistently feeding yourself. If your body truly is hungry or deprived in some way, it's not going to feel safe. We always say, a fed body is a safe
Yeah.
body, and
I like that.
food is medicine. And if you want if you want lower levels of anxiety and depression, eating consistently is your foundation.
That's beautiful. Yeah, I definitely get hangry. I'm not even gonna try and pretend I don't. And my
Right.
nephew is terrible. And when he was a little boy, he was probably, I don't know, 4. I'd be like, "Uh-oh, I think the grizzly bear is coming out." And he'd be like, "It is, auntie. I'm so hungry."
You need a peanut butter and jelly
And
right
then we
now.
would, go through a growling period. But like hearing you talk about it from through a lens of safety,
Mhm.
so yeah, the grizzly bear comes out because our body is not feeling safe, right? Like when we
Yeah.
think about getting hangry, what
Uh-huh.
is anger but the defenseman for fear,
Yep.
right? So as the body is like hungry and
Mhm.
scared, we
Mhm.
get angry to protect ourselves. That's
Yeah.
wild.
Yeah, or
Man.
you just stay in a state of stress, and then
Yes.
eventually, your body does shut down. It can't tolerate that level of
Mhm.
activation in anger or in anxiety for too long, before
Yeah.
it will shut down in some way.
Poor nervous system.
I know. It needs to be fed.
I know. Over this past 10 days that I had COVID, I don't know how many times I was like, body, I'm so proud of you. You're doing so good. Like, because I was so hungry. Like the first 7 days, I ate so much food. And I was just like, all right, if this is what you need, I got you, girl. I'm going to feed you constantly so you can go to work.
Yeah. Listening to your body. Yep. That's a great thing.
But it took me years. It took me so many years, especially after being an athlete for a very long time, being in the military, because we're taught, pain is weakness leaving the body.
Yes.
Sweat is fat crying, right? So many terrible things, but they're shouted at you. And, once you're past that, a big part of what I try to do when I work with military is reestablishing or establishing a new relationship with the body. Because like I said, I had to do it myself and it took years, and I still have moments where I'm like, oh, Adrian, no. That is not how we talk to our bodies. Like our body is our friend.
Reparenting yourself a little bit too.
All the time, constantly. Because the thing is like culturally there is so much pressure. And so it's not like you figure it out and then you're like, oh, I'm done. Right. There's a constant practice.
Constant evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Well, that's awesome, Kelsey. I really appreciate you being with us today and sharing all this amazing information. So if somebody wanted to, is your program covered by insurance?
Oh, good question. So our whole practice is in network with United Healthcare. And so that is the one insurance that we do accept. Otherwise, it is private pay. We can provide super bills. If you do have out-of-network benefits, you can try to get some reimbursement that way. And there are several insurance providers that do really well with out-of-network benefits. But if you are self-pay, our individual therapy costs range from $105 to $120, and our groups are always $50. So for someone to be in the program, it would be around $160 a week for that 30 weeks.
That's not terrible. I mean, that's not, I think it's good. I'm just saying. Well, it's reasonable.
It's different for everybody, but we do accept that insurance. And like I said, we can kind of work with you too, if you are out of network, to see if you can get, partial reimbursement too. So
awesome. And you guys have openings for new clients currently?
We do. We just expanded, hired several new therapists this summer. And so we've got therapists with openings now for both adults and adolescents. And we have a therapist who sees families, which is amazing. And then we are also, graduating several out of our RO program. They've finished their 30 weeks. And so we do have openings in that program as well.
Awesome. Okay. So if anybody wanted to look you guys up, get in touch with you, what's your website?
Yes, it is thecurrenttherapyservices.com.
Okay. So, and I'll make sure and put it in the text for this as well.
Yes. And our website has all the information. You can go to our RO-DBT page, or you can just go to our contact page and reach out to us that way. And our intake coordinator will get back with you and set up a free consultation call and try to figure out what it is that you're needing and see how we can help.
Perfect. That is fantastic. Okay, great. And I always ask everybody if there was one thing that you wanted to share with anybody who's listening or watching, what would that be?
That is a really hard question.
Oh, come on. No pressure. It doesn't have to be something like, the biggest idea in the world. No. It's just something you would want everyone to know.
Yeah, I would just say the one takeaway I think from today is that I think really the hardest thing when you feel like you're struggling with something, whether that be eating disorder or past trauma or just anything, it is so hard to just take that initial step to reach out. Right. And I really want to encourage you, if therapy has ever been a thought in your mind, that you just take that one step and just submit that contact, as we try to make it so simple, to just walk you through every step of the process and make it as easy as possible, because we know how hard it is to take that first step to reach out. But there's so many great resources that you don't have to struggle on your own with something. So I guess it would be that.
It's perfect. Perfect. And I absolutely concur.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for your time today, Kelsey. I really appreciate it. And yeah.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking with you.
Oh, me too. Yay. We'll have to have more conversations in the future, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Totally.
All right. To everybody listening and watching, goodbye. Have a lovely week. And yeah, I hope you join us again later. Thank you so much for joining us on The Energetic Psyche, a podcast that live streams every week, Tuesday evenings at 7 p.m. Central Standard Time. I hope you've enjoyed this episode, and I hope you'll join us again in the future. Have a great week.